Hey everyone, we're going to start in about 1 minute. Just wait for a few more people to come in. Oh.
Just calling folks' attention on the staffing side. If the link is not correct for That's Not Funny, you might want to take a look at that. This is the fewer, shorter, better meetings, which will be funny. So.
I hope they figure that out.
Yeah, if you find the correct link, we could also paste it in the chat here for those who join looking for that. Hey, Julia, good to see you. And Nicole joined. Hi, Nicole.
Oh.
Thanks for that thought, Susie. It might be redirecting here if that one's full. The good news is they're recording these sessions, so if you don't get a chance to see it live, you'll be able to watch the recording. Thanks, Abby. All right, Julie, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, great. Hope everybody gets sorted to where you need to be. So welcome everyone to Fewer, Shorter, Better Meetings, getting the most out of stand-ups, networking, and more, presented by Jill Finlayson. Jill Finlayson. My name is Julie Shackford Bradley, and I'm the facilitator today, and I'm coming to you from the Restorative Justice Center here at UC Berkeley. So please note that we will be providing the slides and a recording of this session to everyone on the main Now conference website after the conference has concluded. And also note that in today's session, you will be muted. So please add any questions that you have to the chat, and I'll be collecting the questions and moderating a Q&A at the end of the session. And if you would like to have your question to remain anonymous, you can email me directly through the chat. Or message me directly through the chat. Also note that there is closed captioning available, and you can click on the CC box at the bottom of the screen to allow for subtitles. And so with that, I'm happy to introduce our presenter today, and I'll say a few things about Jill. Jill Finlayson is the director of the Expanding Diversity and Gender Equity in Tech, Edge in Tech initiative at the University of California, co-sponsored by CITRIS, the Center for IT Research in the Interest of Society, and the College of Engineering at UC Berkeley. The program supports research and initiatives to promote the equitable participation, persistence, and advancement of women and other under-included identities in tech, including the annual Women in Tech Symposium and the Athena Awards. Jill co-moderates the Leaders in DEI webinar series with Berkeley Global, which explores equity in HR policies, benefits, and tools. Prior to Berkeley, Jill led mentorship and startup incubator programs for Singularity University. She ran the toys category for 5 years at eBay and managed a community of social entrepreneurs at the Skoll Foundation. She has led marketing at startups and consulted for the World Bank, Gates Foundation, and Ford Foundation. Jill is passionate about inclusive leadership, equitable workplaces, and impact-oriented innovation for all. She participates as a mentor in the BSA Mentor Program, coaches founders of global startups, and has mentored global tech women leaders for the past 10 years. And Jill is a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley. Go Bears, and her pronouns are she, her, and hers. So over to you, Jill.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Julie. And Julie will be joining us for conversation as we go through this, this talk and presentation. So she'll be able to kind of banter with us about the different questions that we have for you. We have several short polls that we'll be doing throughout the meeting. So thank you for joining today. And this is a really important topic. And I think people often underestimate why meetings are so important. So let's go ahead and get started. This is all of us, you know, working from home in our respective little locations. And this is where we've really been spending a lot of our time, is in this white void. And from there, we all feel a little bit fried. We feel like we have been through the works. And the thing is, we're really not alone. Here are all of us feeling this. In fact, according to the Berkeley climate survey, 37% of us feel extremely or moderately exhausted after video conferencing, with an additional 51% saying slight or somewhat exhausted. 27% have extreme or moderate eye irritation after video conferencing. So folks are really feeling this. So let's ask you, what are you feeling? So time for a quick poll here. There we go. All right, so 3 quick questions for you. What is your personal record for consecutive Zoom meetings? Do you regularly take a break between meetings? And how would you describe most of your meetings? So Julie, let's start with you while everybody's taking the poll. So please, you know, click on the answers and we'll look at the results in a few moments. But Julie, what's your personal record? You might need to unmute.
Perfect Zoom situation right there, being muted. I just know that I've had 8 to 8s that, you know, but in between, sometimes I can grab a nap and close my eyes.
Well, that's good. So you do try to take a break?
I mean, I definitely try to, but sometimes it goes on and on and on for many, many hours. So I think I would be in the 6+ category, honestly, but not most days.
Not most days. Well, that's good. And how would you describe most of your meetings?
My meetings are usually very, I mean, the work that I do in restorative justice, I don't usually have regular meetings. I'm meeting with people to talk about their issues and bringing people together to talk about conflicts and harms. And so the meetings are pretty intense.
Ooh, yeah.
Definitely not boring. And there's no multitasking there. I know we're going to get to that later, but
absolutely, yeah, you have to be very focused for those type of meetings for sure. Well, let's share the results with our audience. Let's go ahead and close the poll. And it looks like the majority of the folks were in the 4 to 5. So you were in the extreme group, Julie, at the 6+. I think I have to say I'm in the 6+ as well. And then in terms of a break, at least sometimes, well, I'm glad to see that half the time people are getting a break in there. That's going to be important. And then looking at how you describe meetings, I'm also glad to see that their positive answers are the strongest ones. So necessary, productive, repetitive, okay, well, there's that, and informative, but also too long. All right, well, let's stop sharing the poll and let's take a look at why you should be taking those breaks. So this is an article that was looking at actual brain research of your brain on Zoom. And the top row is if you do your Zoom meetings back to back to back to back. The bottom row is if you take 5-minute or more breaks between meetings. And you can see that there's an actual cumulative effect if you do not take the breaks, and your brain becomes much more stressed and much less able to function effectively. So my first tip for you today is to cut out downtime between your meetings, even if it's just 5 minutes. It makes a difference to your brain, and it's something that you really need to make an effort for. So this little tomato here, let me explain this little tomato. So this is the Pomodoro technique. This is a popular kitchen timer where it can count down how long something needs to bake. In this case, you would use the Pomodoro timer to set it for 25 minutes, and you would turn off any distractions or alerts, and you would work on a task for 25 minutes solid. And then when the alarm goes off, you take a 5-minute break. So this is a technique that's known to promote focus, productivity. And so I use this as a little icon anytime there's sort of a time saving or efficiency tip throughout this presentation. So this is a meeting of types of sorts. And so for this meeting, we have an agenda. Our purpose here is to share strategies and time-saving tips for your meetings, to clarify the purpose of those meetings, to share the practices and that make meetings more effective and equitable, and to help you actually adopt strategies that are going to boost meeting outcomes. What we're not going to talk about today, what the non-purpose is the logistics of meetings, how to set up the room, how many whiteboards to have, how to put the food. Those things are important and they can make a difference, but those are not what we're going to talk about today. As Julie mentioned, we've got this very handy parking lot where we can put ideas and topics that we want to get to, but they don't have to interrupt the flow of the meeting. Our parking lot is the chat box, so please put your questions, but also put your tips in there, because this is the case where there's as much expertise in the audience as there is on the stage here. And so I really would encourage you to share your tips or your takeaways in the chat area. We'll get to those at the end. So the agenda, I'm going to spend about 10 or so minutes talking about the background about why we want to be talking about meetings. And then I'm going to give you 4 ways to make fewer, shorter, better meetings. We're going to reduce the number of meetings. We're going to reshape meetings. We're going to retool the meetings, and we're going to rejuvenate the meetings. So let's go ahead and get started. There are over 60,000 books on Amazon for meetings. This is a topic that obviously has taken on a life of its own. People want to make the meetings more effective. There's a whole new look at meetings given the virtual setting. And I love the title, of course, Bad Meetings Happen to Good People, even with the best of intent. And it's really important to keep in mind, meetings are really, really useful. They improve communication, they bring issues to the forefront, they provide accountability, they build team morale, they foster collaboration, and really a shared sense of purpose. There is the bad, though. According to various reports, and that's why I have a range here, is there's different reports, between 37 to 67% of meetings are pointless. That they cost $541 billion a year, 24 billion hours. And this is people meeting repeatedly. 11 million meetings are held on average every single day, 62 meetings every month. And if you're in middle management, you might spend 35% of your time in meetings. Those higher up can spend 50% or more of their time in meetings. So this is a big amount of time. And it's not just the cost of the meeting itself. It's the pre-work, it's the post-work that has to be counted in as well. And COVID did change a few things, which is pretty interesting. They actually increased the number of meetings on average, which is probably a surprise to no one, but the average length of the meeting time decreased, which was interesting. And here's your Pomodoro tip for this area, which is that virtual meetings can actually save time. When you're having a meeting in a physical room, you can spend up to 30 minutes looking for a room to hold that meeting. Whereas with the virtual meeting space, you have a ready set room. So something to keep in mind as we go forward and think about the hybrid workplace that we're going to have in the future. So another quick poll. Let's bring up poll number 2. We want to know, how many meetings do you have per week on average? And how often do you multitask during the video conference? So let's open that poll for everybody. So please give us your answers. And Julie, how many meetings do you have per week?
I think I'm an anomaly. I don't have that many meetings, like regular meetings as you're talking about. Probably about 5 or 6
Okay.
Together.
And you have a variety of different types of meetings. You were saying earlier, some of them you can multitask in, but others not so much. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, a lot of the time you're just, you're trying to invite people to talk about their issues and their experiences. So for that, you really don't want to be multitasking. But I've also noticed that I'm just afraid to multitask, because as soon as I do, I've missed 10 minutes and then someone's asking me a question that I can't answer, or I'm in a breakout room and I'm supposed to be talking about something. So I try to focus if I can.
That makes sense. All right, let's share the poll results. So looking at the results here, we have an average of 3 to 5 meetings per week, but we do have someone with 18 or more meetings a week, some 11 to 17. So this is a lot of time. And then in terms of multitasking during the video conference, which you can all raise your hands right now, it looks like that's 39, almost 40% of people do it often or always, often or always. All right, let's see how that compares. Here is the UC Berkeley culture survey. And we'll see we're pretty representative, actually. Often or always, 27 and 10, so 37%, so pretty similar. And the reason that people say they multitask during these meetings is that they actually the meeting doesn't require their full attention or full participation, which begs the question, do you even need to be at that meeting? Or could you be at that meeting for just a portion of it? So those are some of the things that we're going to look at today. Also really interesting about multitasking, it typically happens in large meetings, long meetings, morning meetings, which kind of surprised me, and in recurring or regularly scheduled meetings. So this also begs the question of, maybe you want to change up your meetings, maybe have one-off meetings rather than regular meetings. So some things that we can think about there. But multitasking isn't always a bad thing either. It can boost productivity, even though it might cause mental fatigue or loss of attention. But the type of multitasking that can be really helpful during a meeting are taking collaborative notes, looking for information relevant to the meeting. And so really fostering and supporting, giving people the tools to chat and share information about what the topic of the meeting is about can actually enhance the productivity of the meeting. So before we go into our plan of attack on reducing the number of meetings, we're going to just run through a variety of different types of meetings, because I think it's important to understand why some meetings exist and what is the goals. So the first one is a status meeting, where you want to have what I call a stand-up or an agile meeting, where everybody just sort of shares what they're working on, what their progress is, anything that's blocking them, and how they can go forward. And the great part about doing a status meeting is it gets everyone on the same page. It makes sure that people are aware of what each other is doing, which opens up opportunities for collaboration. And it also allows you to address any challenges or barriers to actually getting the work done. Another type of meeting is decision-making, where you want to agree on a course of action. Here, you're really looking to bring in expertise, explore the options, really solicit different points of view and opinion, build consensus, and identify next steps. What's really interesting over here, our little Pomodoro tip, is Edward Tufte, who is a famous designer of data and visualization, said he uses working meetings to read documents, because nobody reads the documents in advance, right? And if you have people come to the meeting, they can actually read faster than you can actually present. And so this opportunity to really focus in on how quickly people can learn, what they can read, and then use the time for actual discussion. So problem-solving meetings. So this is when, maybe something's gone wrong, something's broken, there's a problem, and you want to find out what was the cause, the root cause, and how to fix it and prevent it from happening again in the future. This is often in a response or a strategy session, and you want to come up with a solution, a timetable, or a safeguard. There are team building meetings where the goal is to foster one understanding of one another, improve trust, help everybody feel valued, shared vision, and increase your dedication to getting the job done. These are typically more fun. They have a lot more activities that are usually involved in them. And then there's information sharing, which is what we're doing here today. And so this is the opportunity to educate, share best practices, and you oftentimes bring in speakers or guests or different things like that. Innovation meetings are my personal favorite meeting because it's about brainstorming, generating ideas, quantity over quality, creativity, blue sky thinking, and really building excitement about a project. So those are kind of my favorite. And then I wanted to address networking meetings because there are some great opportunities here through the Now conference to really network with other people. And the goal of networking is to provide shared value. You want to help them, they can help you. You want to gain some job or industry insights, connections. There's a little bit of serendipity around this, like you don't know what connections you might have. And so there are different ways to build a relationship. And it really comes from a place of authentic curiosity. You want to learn more about what this person is doing. You want to see if there's any way you can help them with what they're doing and what can you learn from what they're doing. So I really encourage people to, be brave, reach out, but be relevant. Don't just ask people for coffee and ask people for their time as a one-way street. Try to make it a two-way street. And I will point out up here that Charlotte and Jennifer put together a session here for Now that you can go watch the recording when it's available. It's called It Starts With You, Building Relationships at Berkeley. So definitely take a look at that. And finally, before we go into our tactics, what makes a meeting engaging? Well, clear communication. The organizer is clearly prepared. There's an agenda. Decisions get made. Begins and ends on time, and the organizer really listens to what people say. So this is at its core what you want to design your meetings to achieve. So let's talk about how we can have fewer, better, shorter meetings. So let's talk about reducing meetings. As you may have heard from a very old law, Parkinson's law, work expands to fill the time allotted for it. So if you have a 60-minute space allotted for a meeting, guess how long that meeting is going to take? It's going to take the full 60 minutes because people will just expand or add to the conversations. So here's my first tip for you. Shorter meetings. And there's a very handy BCal tool here where you can go to your settings, and by clicking speedy meetings, it's going to change your meetings from 60 minutes to 50 minutes as the default, from 30 minutes to 25 minutes as the default. This not only has that great advantage of giving you that 5-minute break that you need between meetings, it also makes people value the time more. If you only have 25 minutes, you're going to use that time more effectively than if you think you have 30 minutes or an hour. So this is a really key tip, and it's super fast and easy way to immediately shorten your meetings. The second thing, and this was a colleague of mine, created a poster called Gaishido. And Gaishido stands for getting your stuff done. And they went through several key attributes that allow you to be as productive as you can possibly be. And number 5 is no meetings. Now that may be a little bit extreme, but what they're saying is either you're having a standing meeting where everybody gets together and does that, sharing of status, sharing of information, or you're socializing. You're having a breakfast, a lunch, a coffee. If not, you shouldn't be having the meeting. So this is why you want to ask the question, do we really need a meeting? I love this Dilbert cartoon. What's your take on this, Dilbert? What? Sorry, I was using this time to think about something actually useful. Maybe your boss can fill you in. I was brain golfing, right? So do you really need a meeting? And so you can ask the question, are there alternative ways to get the same outcomes that you need? Are there, can you ask a poll? Can you survey people? Can you share a document that asynchronously people can really be thoughtful, right? That's one of the great advantages of asynchronous collaboration is people don't feel like they have to just answer the question right off the top of their head. They can actually be thoughtful and really develop a reasonable feedback or provide edits or different things like that. So refer back to the type of meeting you're planning to have. What is the purpose? What is the desired outcome? And might there be a better way to get that information? Number 3, fewer attendees. Who really needs to be there? And this is one of those situations where people oftentimes want to invite everyone because they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. but there really only are 2 or 3 people that need to be at that meeting. So here's where you have the option of making required versus optional. When you go to your BCal and you have your list of invitees, if you click on the little figure icon and it becomes a hollow icon, those people are optional. Now, when you look at the schedule, you're looking at only the schedules for the required people. And this is really important, but it also means supervisors have to make it clear that they really are optional, right? Like you don't want to have it just be like, well, if I don't show up, I'm going to seem like I'm not a go-getter. You want to be really clear. And you also want to help people skip parts of meetings. If they don't need to be there for the whole thing, can they come for just their portion of the meeting? And then finally, can you record the meeting? That way other people can asynchronously watch it to get caught up and to be aware of what's going on, but if they're not an active participant in that meeting. And finally, to reduce meetings, you can have less frequent meetings. It's very easy to go, oh, we need to meet, let's make it a weekly meeting. Ask the question, does it need to be weekly? Can it be bi-weekly? Can it be monthly? Can it be quarterly? One of the people that we were interviewing for a job came in and he said his approach was to get the group that needs to get together and say, we're only going to have 4 meetings. And then at the third meeting, we're only going to have 2 more meetings. At the last meeting, we're only having 1 more meeting. This is it. We're done. And what was so great, if we hearken back to the multitasking, people are less likely to multitask if it's not an ongoing meeting. And at the end of that 4 meetings, it stops, it's done. And if somebody wants to continue it, they can take over that responsibility. So kind of giving it an ending date and really thinking thoughtfully about when you need and how long you need to meet for. So another quick poll. Let's bring it up. Which way do you think will be the easiest for you to reduce the number of meetings that you're in? So you've got some options here. Let me know what you think. So Julie, which of these 4 strategies do you think you would use mostly?
I think I really like the idea of making attendees optional and also having the ad hoc limited meetings. I agree that that is a way to focus attention and not just make it seem like, oh, this is something that we do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of advantages, and it's so easy to kind of default to the way things are always done, but really being thoughtful, I think, makes it a lot more valuable. All right, let's end our poll and see where we are. We have 32% say make meetings shorter. I agree, so easy, right? This is literally a quick click of a button and you've shortened the meetings right then and there. And then our second runner-up is having more ad hoc meetings, like Julie said, and then collaborating asynchronously. So not as many people on the attendees optional list, so that's interesting. All right, thank you all for participating in that survey. Next section. So now we want to talk about how can we reshape meetings. So the first clue here is no agenda, no attenda. And so this is the case where if you have a standing meeting, have a collaborative agenda. Let people add to that agenda. They should always append to the end because that'll encourage people to add their items earlier. But if no one has anything to discuss, cancel the meeting. Wow, I know, novel, right? To actually say, nope, we didn't have anything to talk about, let's cancel that meeting. And assign times, again, so that if people do not need to be there for the full meeting, they know what block they need to be there for. So at its core, we know most successful meetings have a purpose and have an agenda. So no agenda, no attenda. Secondly, and this is one of my favorites, obviously being from the Edge and Tech initiative, we really want to democratize meetings. So as I was mentioning with the collaborative agenda, if everybody participates in creating the agenda, everybody has ownership of the meeting. Along with that, you should have collaborative note-taking. Disproportionately, women and people of color get relegated a lot of the housekeeping tasks like taking notes, and that's not a fair way of doing things, nor is it a good way of doing things, because you want to have people really collaborate on the note-taking because you'll get more complete notes, you'll get more accurate notes, and it'll be a single source of truth that you can refer back to at a later date. This will become really important when we have a hybrid workplace where some are remote and some are coming into the building. You don't want to have hallway conversations replacing conversations in these meetings, because you need to know that everybody is on the same page and has the same information. So collaborative note-taking, really super important. Sure, many of you have heard the idea of take space or make space. So if you are an introvert and very quiet and you're aware that you're not contributing to a meeting, you need to step up and take space and make sure your opinion is being shared and your insights are being shared. It's super valuable, so you need to be taking ownership of that. Similarly, if you're hearing yourself talk like me right now, and you're not hearing anyone else talk, you need to take a step back and make room for other people. I always think in my head, I know what I'm going to say. Does anybody else really need to hear that? I'd rather hear something that someone else has to say because I don't know that piece of information. In meetings, you also want to be a better ally. BetterAllies.com is the link here. They have a lot of tips around best practices in a meeting. If someone is being talked over, how can you interrupt that behavior? If somebody's not getting credit for their work, how can you interrupt that behavior? So I think this is really important. And micro affirmations, small things you can do that collectively make people feel like they belong, you can make that happen. And meetings is a really great place to do that. We also need better leadership. This takes a different leadership style. You really have to create psychological security. I think we've seen with the COVID and working remotely, you have to build trust, right? You have to be able to ensure that people are able to do their best work. And so those are really key things in meetings, because people have to feel like they can say something if they see something. They want to be able to share their point of view without fear of retribution or penalty. So that's super important. Similarly, leaders can make sure that everybody's voice is heard. They can rotate the order that things are talked about. They can rotate who is even moderating the conversation. And this really provides a great foundation for equity. And then I've put a link in this document. The PDF has all the links in it. I'm very concerned about the remote work transition to back to the workplace, to the hybrid workplace. And there's a lot of issues around how are we going to do that in a way that's fair and inclusive, so the people who choose to work remotely, which disproportionately is women and other under-included identities, do not end up being penalized because they chose this legitimate path and very successful path for being productive. So there are some really big meetings. So I wanted to take just a quick sidebar here to talk about how you can design meetings that are big, important, and complex. So here you might want to have a background. So for the meeting, you need to level set everyone with, here's the information you need to know to participate in this meeting. And they can refer back to that information without interrupting the flow of the meeting. You want to have a very specific topic, and it takes a long time to get a very good topic. 10 words or less. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's the purpose, the end goal. It should be precise and measurable. Non-purpose, things that we're not going to get discussed, so you don't get taken off the track of what you're really trying to do. Parking lot, a place to put ideas that you may not be addressing during this meeting today, but ideas that you don't want to forget. This permission meter is a really fun idea. So we talked about meetings where there's brainstorming. So you can give permission to people to be like, really think outside the box, think really big. But if the meeting is designed to fix something in the next 3 months and have a pragmatic plan, you might want to bring the permission meter down to something more practical, more pragmatic. And what's great is by telling people what your expectations are, you'll get more actionable feedback for the type of work that you're trying to do. You might even do 2 parts to a meeting, brainstorming in the morning, then take a vote to see which ideas are the most popular, pick the top 2 and use the second half of the meeting for a more pragmatic plan to implement those 2 best ideas. This is a whole process for doing this, and it comes from this book, The Compression Planning Advantage, which is, I will say, a lot more words than it needs to be, but it's a really handy tool for important meetings where you want to make sure that everybody can participate and you have clear actions that come out of that meeting. And then the final thing I want to say about reshaping meetings is how important it is to avoid simple sabotage. This comes from a CIA field manual that says, these are things you can do to sabotage people. Insist on doing everything through channels. Never permit shortcuts to expedite decisions. Talk as frequently as possible and at great length. Refer all matters to committees. Make committees as large as possible, never fewer than 5. Bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. Haggle over the precise wording. Refer back to matters decided upon at the last meeting and attempt to reopen that topic for discussion. How many of you have seen this happen in your meetings, in your experience? I certainly have seen these things. And so this is an opportunity, yes, too many times, all the time. I'm seeing in the notes here. This is how you can make your meetings be not effective. And so finding ways to intercept those behaviors is going to be really, really important. So let's do a quick poll again. Number 4, please. All right, here we go. Which strategy do you prefer for reshaping your meetings? So Julie, what do you think? What is your favorite way to reshape a meeting?
Well, I definitely like the idea of the collaborative agenda. And I've noticed that people, if they can work out that agenda beforehand in, through emails or on a Google Doc, then that does result in a lot more inclusivity during the meeting. So it takes the planning before the meeting, which a lot of people, I think, don't factor in as much as they could.
100% agree with you. The best meetings have preparation. Preparation requires time, right? That requires effort. And so I think that that's really, really key. The only exception I would say, and I've found myself in this situation as well, where like I'm working on the Women in Tech Symposium and we have a planning committee. And I don't necessarily have the answers, but I put together at least a list of the questions, right? And then we make it a working meeting and we kind of go through and work through each of those questions. But the better the preparation, the better the outcomes. So, all right, let's close this poll and see what people had to say. All right, so greater preparation is by far the winner. And then I'm glad to see collaborative agenda and note-taking really showing up there. Great, thank you all for participating in that question. All right, tools. No talk would be complete without really going into the tech tools that are out there to make your meeting experience better and more effective. So let's talk about scheduling. As I mentioned at the very beginning, having an online meeting can save you time because you don't have to schedule a room, which is a bonus. But when you do have to schedule with groups, we all know this can take a huge amount of time. I used to use Doodle Poll, but that one now charges money. So I have switched over to When to Meet. And you can see how this can be a real time saver because you send this out to everybody, you find out when everybody's available, and you can pick the best date. I've also been known to just, do the Hail Mary, throw a date out there and hope that everybody can do it and see what happens there. If you're scheduling with individuals, how many of you have used the Calendly? This is a super helpful tool. And what's nice about the Calendly, as you can see right here, is you can actually customize it to your name. You can send it to people. You can choose the length of meeting that you want people to schedule you for. I've actually updated this since I did this screen capture to be 25 minutes and 50 minutes to be consistent with my BCal, and allowing people to just go ahead and book based on the time. Yeah, Erin's used them both. It's super helpful and it just saves you a lot of that back and forth. And I'll just say also that you can really set your availability. So if you only want to have blocks of time to be productive and do your work, you can schedule just, Tuesday and Thursday mornings for meetings, or you can open it up to whatever times you want to make available. Zoom can also be personalized. I did not know this until I was preparing for this talk, but Zoom is actually retouching and making me look a little better. I did not know that. You can also do your own eyebrows and mustache or beard. I look pretty good with a goatee, I decided, not too bad. Lip color, these are really, really silly things, but I had no idea they were available. But what is valuable is that you can create your own Zoom link. And so rather than having to find a Zoom link and try and remember what it is, you can very quickly drop the location of the meeting right into your calendar. This is one that also was relatively new to me. And actually the Dean of the College of Engineering, Sujay, really brought this to my attention. We were doing a meeting and she said, can you turn on the live transcript? And I'm like, we have a live transcript? This is news to me. And yes, and if you're recording your meeting, you'll receive a text file with the entire live transcript. And I have to say, I've gone to Google Docs and used the voice record tool. It's not very good. The live transcript is pretty darn accurate. So it's a good way to even dictate and to create a script from your talk just by doing that recording and having that. I also wanted to drop in, sometimes when you're in a meeting and you hear one of your tabs is starting to talk. I'm sure most of you know this, but it took me a while to realize that the one with the little speaker is the one making noise so that I could zero in on it more quickly and make sure that I'm not making noise during a meeting. There are, as you've seen, a bunch of polling tools, and polling tools are great. Not only do they make meetings engaging, but they give you data. You get to save the results of those polls. You can refer back to it at a later date. The polling from Zoom is pretty simple. It's either single answer or multiple answer, but you can use tools like Slido or Mentimeter, and these ones really do give you options where you have multiple choice. You can do a word cloud, open-ended, you can do scales, ranking, Q&A. So I use this in a couple of different meetings. This little chart here is from a meeting with our leadership roundtable where we were asking corporate execs around these questions. Good question, Lucy, I'll come back to that. This question about what's the biggest pressing issues concerning you? And employee burnout was a very high topic. And so being able to quickly survey the people in the room, get a temperature gauge of what's really happening is super helpful. So let's try that. Oh, and before I do that, let me give you some other collaboration and creativity tools. So this is also from that leadership roundtable. We invited all the people in that group to join us in Mural and to create Post-it notes. So we asked questions of like, how can you really engineer serendipity when you're in a virtual setting, right? You don't have the bumping into somebody in the hallway. And so we looked for each person to just grab a Post-it note, add a comment, put the comment in here. And so now we have this entire board where people have virtually brainstormed and used Post-it notes, but in a virtual setting. Miro is a similar one. And then Coggle here is a mind mapping tool, which is another great collaborative tool for building out a mind map of different topics. In this case, I was preparing for the human-computer interaction focus of the Women in Tech Symposium, and we wanted to understand the history, what types of jobs there were, what types of skills you need, and what type of applications are there. So it was a really helpful tool. So there are ways to collaborate online, and I know a lot of people have concerns about losing innovation, but innovation wasn't necessarily happening in the same way for everybody when you're introvert or extrovert in the office. So it's always good to have a variety of tools available. So let's do a Mentee poll. Julie, can you drop the link in the chat? And we'll also, you can just go to Mentee. I'll jump over there now. So this is an example of the Mentee poll. So join me here. You can go to mentee.com and use this code, or you can click on the link that's in the chat and share with us in short words, what is your biggest pet peeve about meetings? And this is going to become a word cloud. So if the same word is mentioned multiple times, it'll become bigger. If different things appear, it'll become different. There we go. Redundancy, useless, boring, waste. There we go. It's fun to watch, isn't it? To see how these all appear. Long-winded, interrupters. Yes, that's why we need the better allies. Toxic individuals is a challenge. And how do you take those people offline? How do you have conversations with them to improve behaviors? Really helpful. Yeah. Off topic. That's why I like the parking lot, because you can take topics that are like, that's really interesting, but we're not focused on that today. Can we just make a note of that and we'll put it on an agenda for a future meeting? I see Long really coming to the front there. So Julie, what's your biggest pet peeve?
I saw someone had written blah, blah, blah. I think that's sort of what I was feeling, but also because I am an introvert, and so I don't necessarily jump in. And sometimes, at some meetings, I never say anything unless, there's a person leading the meeting who will say, oh, who will make sure that everybody has a voice. So I think that's really
Nice.
important.
Yeah. All right, let me go on to the next one here. Let me close the voting on this one. This is great. We'll save this and let's do our next one. I want to know what your favorite thing is about meetings. So we've kind of heard what can go wrong, but what is the best thing about meetings? What do you get out of them? Informative, I see in the chat. Collaborative, yep. Connection. Seeing faces, me too. Love that. And that's one of the things I do like about having a hybrid workplace where you can actually see people in person. Teamwork, immediate decision making. That is critical, right? Like a good meeting, you're going to walk out and have made some decisions moving forward. Energy, different perspectives. Yes, 100% on that. Innovation, information, humor. Yes, please. I will take more humor. Outstanding. All right. Julie, what's your favorite thing?
I'm going to go with innovation too. And I love the brainstorming, generating ideas meetings that you were talking about, and just feeling like being together with others, collaborating on coming up with new ideas. Yeah, I love that in a meeting.
And I got to give a +1 to the free food in the chat. Excellent. All right, let's close this voting. Thank you for that. And let's go to our last question here. What advice do you have for making meetings great? So you've heard some of my ideas. I've got one last group of ideas to share with you, but what is your advice for making meetings great? Julie, what's your advice?
I think starting with a check-in is good, and just getting a sense of who's in the room and how people are feeling that day, or something that they did over their weekend that they're happy about, or something like that. Is it not?
Yeah, I fixed it now. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be working now. There we
Okay.
go. Straight to the point. Yeah, sorry. Continue, Julie.
Yeah, so check-ins and just building relationships right at the beginning before you dig right into the topic, because a lot of time people come in and it just get going, and so you miss that piece.
Yeah, agree. I'm seeing a lot for the agenda, for the ice breaking, something fun first. So that's sort of similar to yours, part of the small talk, but also just, some icebreakers, different things like that. What other advice? What's worked well in a meeting you've been to recently, Julie?
I guess having an agenda, I'd say, or just really knowing why you're there, having a purpose, even if it's not all laid out in an agenda. And also people being, kind of open and transparent, and saying, especially if there's a problem or an issue, saying, we're going to be transparent here. We need to talk about this in this way. It makes you feel like you can participate more and be more engaged. Because I noticed that some of these issues around changing the culture, it will take a lot of courage to kind of speak up in your space and say, I think we need to do this differently. There can be some defensiveness, and so yeah, figuring out how to make those changes.
Yeah,
make people feel good about it.
Yeah, I think there's something there around setting expectations, giving people permission, and really helping them to know what the ground rules are, and that their opinion really matters, that you're really, building that psychological security, right? Like, there are no wrong answers. We need as much information as we can. At the end of the day, not everybody's opinion will be in the final decision, but it's important to have it be considered and to make sure that we're hearing all of those things, because I'm a big yes and person. Like, we can do this and we can solve this other problem that this person brought up. Just looking here, Scrum first to identify items of interest for the group. So making sure that you're picking the right topics is a really interesting one. Establishing rapport, shared values. I like this person very pragmatically, assign action items and due dates, an agenda. This is great, super helpful. Keep those coming. I think those are really helpful, tangible next steps. So we'll include this in the final report so that you can have a copy of everybody else's ideas here. All right, well, thank you all for your contributions. This is super helpful. Including all voices is always a favorite of mine. Starting and ending on time. Yeah. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this, and we're going to go back to our last opportunities here. So we want to now rejuvenate our meetings. So we've been through kind of all of the, how do we have fewer meetings? So those meetings that you do keep, how do you make them fresher, better? So the first tip I have for you, and I've just started doing this myself, 100%, I agree with this, hide your self view. You don't need to be looking at yourself, and you don't have to turn off your camera. People really do like to connect with you and see your face, but do you have to see your own face? You know, who really wants to continually stare at themselves? And it turns out Zoom fatigue is even greater for women. There's something called mirror anxiety, where how distracting do you see your own image? And women more so feel more stress around that. And so just turning off your self view. So going to those 3 little dots in the corner and choosing hide self view right there. And this works in other meetings as well. You can choose stack or side by side, where your image is either very tiny or not there. This is out of my husband's company uses a different software. So regardless of where you are, you can actually hide yourself. And I totally recommend it because it's just one less thing to look at. 2, walking meetings. You definitely want to get out, get walking. So especially as we come back to campus, we sit down a lot, really way too much. We are sedentary beings, and this is not good for us. You know, there's this, you know, sitting is the new smoking. I don't think it's as bad as smoking, but it's certainly not good. It leads to a lot of increased causes for death. And it's also just a great way to boost rapport, community, innovation. Your own mind just thinks differently when you go out for a walk. Have you ever been like thinking about a problem and then you get up and you go outside to do something and suddenly the answer comes to you? That's why walking meetings really matter. Delight and surprise. We talked earlier about food. Even in the virtual setting, you can mail people things. So we're doing this meeting tomorrow with our leadership roundtable, and I mailed them chocolate. Now I kept with my theme of, you know, women empowerment and sent them some chocolate, but there is some delight and surprise if you have the budget to send somebody a small gift in the mail. I know the College of Engineering sent out some snacks to people. It's a small thing, but it really does inspire people. There are, of course, you know, games and mental health breathers. During the Now conference today, they had Zumba and they had breathing and they had different activities. And of course, coming up with new and fun icebreakers are always great. Having people get into smaller groups where they can get to know each other really does help a lot. And just literally taking breaks makes a huge difference as well. And then this is what you were saying, Julie, exactly, small talk, making time for small talk in virtual meetings. This makes us smarter, it makes us happier, it makes us feel better, and it really builds those relationships that we would normally have just walking down the hallway. It's your opportunity to really connect with people, so don't underestimate the value of small talk. So if we're going to recap the next steps here, I want to open this up to questions for you, but I'm hoping that you walk away from this knowing that you can reduce the number of meetings, you can reshape those meetings, you can use tools to make those meetings more effective, and you can take a few small efforts to make the meetings more fun and rejuvenating. And at the end of the day, we're going to have a better and more equitable new normal. We're never going to go back to pre-COVID. We're never going to go back to what life was. So now let's take that opportunity. Let's take the good stuff. Let's keep the good stuff, and the stuff that didn't work, we can change and iterate. I have a whole talk just looking at, you know, some of those questions about how do we design a better new normal, but a lot of it's going to come down to good communication, better planning, and better evaluation. So I really hope that this was helpful for you, but I want to open it up to you for questions. So maybe I can turn it over to Julie. If you've seen any questions in the chat that you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I'll start with one that it was a comment that came early on, which was to say that a person was noting that they didn't have control over their own schedule. So meetings were scheduled for them in ways that they couldn't really, have a say in whether to take a break in between. And so I guess I wonder what a person could do in that circumstance.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One would be to have in a regular stand-up meeting, your one-on-one meeting with your boss to say, could we adjust to the shorter schedule where we have 5-minute breaks between meetings? Can we make that a practice? But then if they are being scheduled for them, they can also raise the question, which of these meetings do I need to be at? Which, are you just including me as FYI, and getting some clarity around, what are the expectations? Which ones are critical? Which ones may not be critical? And if they're all critical, then there's a question of can we space them out?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, going to your supervisor or whoever is doing that and asking those questions. Yeah. Okay, someone wrote, I find collaborative note-taking in meetings distracting because too many are typing and then correcting each other. Do you have any suggestions for that?
When people are all working on the same collaborative doc?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. It can be a challenge. Sometimes when I'm participating, if somebody looks like they have it, I sort of stand back and let them kind of type in, and then I go add my pieces afterwards. So I think it's a little bit of a judgment call on when to step back and when to enter. The other thing people have been known to do is just open up their own doc and kind of take their own notes and then copy and paste them into the other doc, just so that they're not jumping around as much.
Got it. All right, and then there's a couple of different questions around hybrid meetings and what that's going to be like. So first of all, just you have tips for future meetings that may be hybrid, where there's some people in person and some on Zoom. And then secondly, how would you do the polling and some of the other strategies that you were talking about in those hybrid spaces?
So I am a strong advocate of remote first. That means that if you're going to have a meeting, everybody's going to log in from their individual laptop, even if they're at the office. They're going to log in from their individual laptop. That way everybody has the same grounding, the same space. It doesn't work well to have 6 people on one video camera and everybody else as individuals. So this is what I mean by remote first. The assumption is every meeting will be tuned for remote, even if you're there in person. If there's going to be a meeting where you want people to physically be there, then that needs to be discussed in advance and shared out. And this is really important for equity, because if people are working remotely, they don't want to be left out of the meeting. They don't want to be, have a sidebar conversation that happens outside the meeting that, doesn't get captured in those notes. And so that's really the key takeaway. And that book, Distributed Teams, that John O'Dinn wrote, really goes into a lot of really pragmatic details. He wrote that book long before COVID, and he's just updated it. And it really goes into these best practices because everybody has the same size head, everybody has the equal participation. So I think we really do need to think remote first and then schedule special meetings if that's going to be the exception.
Mm-hmm. And then just to go off of that, how do you do the microphones with that? I mean, how do people, is everyone muted? Or because I know you get all that feedback if everyone's on the Zoom call in the same room.
I mean, ideally they're doing it from their own space, so they're not in the same room. But if they're in the same room and they're still logged on to their computer, everybody mutes except for one person, and basically following the same etiquette that only the person speaking should be unmuted at any moment.
Okay, because okay, let me just speak from my own experience. Right now I have a cubicle, so I'm not able to kind of have a private conversation as it, through my laptop in my cubicle in the way that I would want to have, or that I could have from home.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting point, which is physical spaces. So one of the things I'm concerned about in the return to work is some of the policies are, if you're going to be at the office 3 days or more a week, you might get an office. If you're less than that, you get a shared space or an unassigned desk. And on the surface, that seems perfectly reasonable until you look at the fact that women and other under-included identities prefer to work from home. And so suddenly now men are getting all the offices and women and others are not getting any offices. And so I think we have to think very carefully about how we work with spaces and make them as equitable as possible so everybody can join an unassigned desk. But yeah, there are needs for more meeting rooms. There's needs for more phone booths. So it's a different use of space, right? As we go forward. So it's going to be really interesting to see how we evolve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And a couple people asked about how do you interrupt simple sabotage? All those sabotage, you said we need to interrupt that, but that seems challenging.
So I think a couple things. One would be to refer back to the agenda or say, that's a great point. Can we put it in the parking lot? Some of it is having those offline conversations like, I don't think we got through as much of the agenda as we had hoped to because we got taken off on this issue. Can we, having that one-on-one conversation with the person, like, can you add your item to the agenda so that we can plan for that time and allotment?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. Well, one person is suggesting that that you or someone, it would be great to have a 1 to 2 page best practices tips for hybrid meetings that could be widely available for the campus, because I'm sure that a lot of people have those concerns going back. What is it going to be like? So
yeah, well, let me share this and maybe I can turn this into a document, but this is just some notes that I've preliminarily made, talking about how we do have a bunch of people who prefer working on-site and remotely, the hybrid, and we have people who want to work from home, and you'll see that women are 35% compared to men at 24%. And so it's a pretty noticeable difference. So these are some of my tips. Create clear policies and criteria. You have to decide who has to come to on-site. And, if they're frontline staff, we might ask, can they still have a remote day once a week? So I think we got to think about a lot of these equity issues. For example, Google just recently said all of their childcare workers had to come back to work, and yet they're not running the Google shuttles. And so they're expecting these people, not all of their staff, just the childcare workers have to come back 5 days a week, and they only get paid like $20 an hour. And now they have to pay their transportation costs in addition to that. So they're asking Google to give them a stipend for transportation. So there's some other considerations here of, those who have to come back are incurring some additional expenses. Similarly, how we measure outcomes is going to be really important because people can very easily slip back to, measuring seat time. Did I see them working hard? And then, oh, those people are working remotely. I didn't see them working hard. It's like, are only the go-getters coming back to campus? No, I can speak for myself. The go-getters are working remotely. So I think we're going to have some challenges there that we need to think about. Thinking about these issues about who's coming in and unintended consequences, creating 2 classes of employees. How do we avert that and intentionally intercept those type of behaviors? The physical space changes. And then, as I was saying, the remote first culture and ensuring people who are working remotely have equitable setups. And then fundamentally, I don't think we have a good way to track this yet. So this is kind of a mystery here of, we don't know who's working remotely and who's not, and how are the equitable impacts of that. So there are a bunch of articles around this that are starting to come out to discuss these things, but part of it talks about, the value of this asynchronous work. But then the balance, why in-person people are more likely to get promoted. That's a problem. So a lot to be worked out, but thank you for that suggestion. And I'm always, interested in what would be helpful and what other people are doing, how you're addressing this return to the workplace.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, here's another kind of specific question around when you repurpose meeting time for asynchronous work, what is your advice for how to keep yourself and others accountable for completing that work? And how do you effectively manage up when working with leaders that are often putting out fires?
All right, let me break those down. So I think from asynchronous work, having deadlines, I myself am a deadline motivated person. And so like for your comments and edits to be included, they have to be in by this date and, you know, sending reminders. I think, just restate that question one more time, because I think there are a lot of moving parts there.
Well, the second part was, how do you effectively manage up when working with leaders who are putting out fires, who are often putting out fires?
So they're calling meetings to react to a situation.
I think
Yeah,
so.
I think that there's a lot around managing upward, but I think maybe tracking some of the information might be a way to kind of get data informed, to be able to have in a meeting, like, you know, we had all these meetings that disrupted the flow or the work that people were trying to get done. Could we get this to a daily stand up or a weekly stand up? So maybe offering some other strategies to make sure that the urgent issues are being addressed, but maybe being addressed in a more proactive than reactive way.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I think those are the main questions that I saw, but if I missed one and someone wants to put something else into the chat or anything else people would like to add.
Yeah, you can just raise your hand or unmute yourself. And I see somebody asked for the draft deck that I put together, so I'm dropping that in.
Great.
And like I said, this is just my first cut at this. And if you are dealing with this situation and you have thoughts or ideas on what you're going to try or how you're going to engage with people, what kind of policies and practices you're going to put in place, because, you know, bias creeps in when there's gray areas, right? And so you want to be as clear and consistent as you can across your team. So definitely interested in what folks are trying to do.
Also, this seemed like a great strategy. Someone wrote, my manager has asked that I prepare to give a summary of the NOW conference and what I learned during the conference. So during our team to a meeting, at a meeting. So I plan to use that opportunity to share some tips about how to make meetings more productive and shorter.
Outstanding. That's fantastic. That's one of my goals of this meeting. Thank you. Yes, wouldn't it be appropriate if the session ended early? Agreed, agreed. Thanks, Adam. So yes, if we've answered all your questions, I'm easy to get to. I'm Finlayson at berkeley.edu. I'm always happy to chat with people. Would love your ideas and input.
All right, so should we finish it out?
Yeah, so thank you, Julie. I'll let you close out, and thank you for your collaboration in discussing all of these important issues.
Yeah, those were a lot of questions, but I appreciate it. All right, so thanks, Jill, for your presentation. And everyone, please remember to complete this evaluation that I am now going to hopefully put in the chat. Yeah, so that evaluation form is there in the chat. We really hope you do that. It's very helpful. And coming up next is a 15-minute break with an optional Tahitian Polynesian dance activity. And you can access that in the main conference room on the program website. And also there's an afternoon keynote, which sounds really good. I guess the name of it is Ask Janet, I'm thinking. And so hope to see you there and hope you all have a great afternoon. And thank you for all your engagement and questions and comments and tips and in the chat. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess that's it for me. I'll see you.